No, Elisabetta, and naturally it's set start to the mini-symposium. I welcome you all, nevertheless, for coming to this event. It is the next edition of the Culture Economics online seminar series COES. Today we decided to have a I would say special session, mini-symposium devoted to methods of causal inference in culture economics. I have to note that we had an idea of this already 2 years back when the Nobel Award was given to David Card, Josh Angrist, and Guido Imbens, because we have several culture economists related strongly to the works of those three. Or also this is Alan B. Kruger, Orly Ashenfeld, and Katie Grady, but we waited apparently until now, so we're very fortunate to have three great presenters, three great presentations, Matthias Sali, Professor David Crosby, and Andrea Baldin. And just to shortly introduce the topic, my name is Andris Rakar. I'm special series coordinator of the COES online seminar series and also very active researcher, I would say, also in the causal inference community. Partly this is the reason for the webinar. So the methods of causal inference and causal discovery in econometrics, statistics, and I would say data science have gained prominence in recent decades following seminar works of Donald Rubin, Judea Pearl, James Heckman, Guido Imbens, Joshua Angrist, Jamie Robins, Philip Dawid, as just few of the many authors. I will say that presently the community of scholars in causal inference, in particular during the pandemic time, has started growing, and it is quite vast. Research has been gaining ground in both potential outcomes, Rubin's causal model, as well as directed acyclic graphical perspective, mostly connected to the name of Judea Pearl. There are combinations arising. The best known is still the 2013 perspective of single word intervention graph of Richardson and Robins. Recently, as I mentioned, also connections of machine learning and data science with causal inference have been subject to a body of research, opening many new perspectives. So this mini-symposium is primarily, I would say, intended for our discussion, between culture economists about three great recent papers using, I would say, very interesting causal approaches, and to discuss those issues which are prominent and essential for econometrics, but also developing highly in statistics and data science, and with different perspectives. You have, as you know, discussions about observational data, about experimental data, more broad statistics. So we hope that today's mini-symposium will bring very interesting presentations and very interesting discussion to give also hopefully some of the ideas for the future work of all of you present. It is a developing area, still rather young, also in statistics, I would say, and econometric in general, and with a lot of developing possibilities. So without further ado, we will start with Matthias Sali, who is recently completed his PhD at Neuchâtel University and is a research fellow at WIPO, World International Property Organization. Matthias, please share your screen. The webinar is recorded. It will be later put online on the COES YouTube channel, and please insert your questions in the chat, and we will try to ask them either during the presentations and mainly in the follow-up debate. Thank you, Matthias. I give the floor to you.
Hi, everyone. So thanks so much for having me and for the organization of this very cool topic, I think. Happy to present here latest research that I conducted with Alexander Kunz, who is in the call as well, I think. So hi, Alex. And yeah, unfortunately, I'm continuing with not really the happiest research question, I'd say. So what this topic is about the death of creators, so artists, and the impact on exhibitions and auction markets. So that's the research question I'm trying to causally approach here with this presentation. So I'd like to start the presentation with actually the paper in a nutshell. So what we try to understand is how the death impacts not only the auctions of artists or prices, but as well the exhibition histories of artists. So this research question essentially has the following results. So what we find is that we observe a sharp but rather short-lived drop in exhibitions causally right after artists die. We develop here a discussion, a theory idea that we call legal transaction costs that we associate with this effect here. On top of that, we do replicate a lot of empirical research that is out there on death and auction prices that is generally finding a positive price premium of artists who pass away and their auction prices following. As a next step, we are looking for heterogeneity in the treatment, and we basically are looking at the age of death. So when artists die and at what age, and what is the correlation impact on exhibitions and auction prices, and as well as the reputation, the approximated reputation the artists have at the time of death. So again, so the research question that I've already stated immediately directs you to actually a very general economic theory that is called the natural end of supply kind of idea. So what happens with markets when the end of supply happens? So usually you would say prices increase because scarcity is increasing, and you actually can also associate this with a kind of an exogenous shock, maybe, because for some people, death is might not expected, or actually almost for no one, but of course, like you have variation in there that you can exploit, econometrically exploit. So I've just cited here a couple of very recent papers. So again, so in the auction literature, you will find a lot of empirical papers that was dealing with this question. And in general, I would say that most of the papers would say that prices increase following the death of artists. However, this research question is not really asked and answered, I'd say, in the exhibition market. What I think is as well a very interesting culture market to look at, because museums can be seen as well as price takers, but also as well as price makers. So there's kind of a interplay between the auction and the exhibition market. So I would say it's definitely worth to look at both markets. If you want to understand auctions, you might also would have to look at their exhibition histories, for example. So you can say then that museums are kind of gatekeepers of artists' careers and preservers of cultural heritage, and so on and so forth. And then lastly, I've already introduced the idea that we call here legal transaction costs. So transaction costs in general, but we call it also legal transaction costs because a lot of transaction costs you actually can relate to legal questions following the death of an artist. So for example, search costs, general economic transaction costs. So that basically means you need to find the copyright holder after someone dies, and then can cause significant transaction costs, for example. You also know something that maybe I've heard of, so the data and control issues. So basically after someone dies, that relates to search costs. So you need to identify heirs, foundations, and so on. Legacy stewardship might have to form, that is unsecure, and many other reasons that can cause transaction costs after someone dies. And finally, what you might not have heard of is also in certain jurisdictions, something like the right to exhibit exists. So even if a museum owns an artwork, it's not absolutely straightforward for them to exhibit actually the artwork. So the right to exhibit can also cause certain clearance of rights before you can exhibit, for example, an artist. Okay, so again, we're in both of those markets, and we wanted to understand also the interplay of those markets. So we developed as well some combined hypotheses, empirical ideas we want to test here, and in both of the markets. And these are the main focus of this research, I would say, that we were looking at. We try to understand that. So again, for example, the first hypothesis is actually rather straightforward. So we understand, we state in this hypothesis that the death of an artist typically has a positive effect on the auction prices. So we already had kind of an idea, but we say as well, okay, on the exhibition markets, you will find as well generally an increase in exhibitions after someone dies. Next, we would say that in both markets that the age at death is negatively correlated with auction and exhibition markets after someone dies, with maybe a diminishing effect for someone who dies very old, because that's kind of the signal that a lot of people would understand the most and was maybe expected. So if you would find effects, then maybe not for someone who dies relatively old. On the auction market, however, we stated some specific hypotheses related to reputation as well. So we would say artists who pass away relatively early with a high reputation at death have larger post-mortem auction prices compared with low reputation artists. So, so you pass away young, unexpected, with a high reputation, you would say that must drive auction prices much. Contrary, you would say that artists who pass away at a very old age with a low reputation, this would result in a lower post-mortem price premium compared with high reputation artists. And then finally, on the exhibition market, again, we again wanted to investigate and measure kind of, or better understand this kind of transaction cost that was referring to, and that it would be something that we specifically target to the exhibition market here. So we web scraped data from artistinfo.com, that is a data host that is collecting a lot of information from artists and their exhibition histories. We draw a random sample of 1,000 artists, and we realized, and this was not really surprisingly, that we will have a sample of relatively known and popular artists, because obviously for the Andy Warhols and Elie Sturtevants and co, you will have way more data and a bit more of a comprehensive data set and overview of their overall exhibition histories. So we collected more than 20,000 exhibitions here. And on top of that, combined that the matching artists that we observed from the exhibition histories, or for the exhibitions, with their auction results, if we find any, and had as well their overall auction histories over time, which resulted in more than 30,000 auctions as well in the combination. And since this was a seminar on causal inference, and I allowed myself to include as well some formulas, but actually I think it will be great to then skip to the results, because it's actually pretty straightforward what we've done in the causal inference. So we've adopted the event study framework, staggered adoption. So we are normalizing the depth of the artists around 0, and create dummy leads and lags that basically indicates how many years before and after the death of an artist we observe. -10 means 10 years before someone dies. 15 means 15 years after someone died. We as well apply the regression discontinuity design, but I'm not going to focus here in this presentation on this empirical framework. And lastly, for auctions, we basically apply a standard hedonic price model. So you have the price of the artworks that is that you associate with the different specific characteristics of the artworks. For example, when the artworks was created, whether it has a signature or not. The medium, of course, is very important, and so on. So this was very well developed in the last couple of decades, I'd say, in causal inference to understand what characteristics of artworks are important in order to understand the prices of artworks. And obviously, we include as well a post-mortem dummy that is one for auctions that were taking place after artists die. Finally, we combine those two ideas, I'd say, and we create an exogenous measure of reputation. So we basically have a panel data of the reputation of the artist over time that allows us to identify the approximated reputation of an artist when she or he dies. So basically, we are collecting the exhibition information. We rank the exhibitions according to the reputation of the museum. So, for example, the MoMA would have a very high reputation, and then some other museums maybe less well known, and you rank them low. All of that is indeed complicated as well. That has been done already so far. Approximate measure of reputation at the time of death. So not an overall reputation that you might know now. Okay, Warhol is very famous now, and this artist is not really well known. So what we do have is the panel information of reputation that I think is very interesting to measure then afterwards. So we include this reputation into the auction price models, and we try to understand the combination of how the exhibition market has impact prices. And then lastly, so let me check the time. The script is, I think that this is a very straightforward, but nevertheless very interesting figure. So this is a simple frequency plot of the number of exhibitions and auctions that we observe for the overall panel of artists that we have with years to and from the death of the artist. And what you can read here, obviously, is that so around 60 years before someone dies, the exhibitions start to increase. So the career starts of an artist, and you start to have exhibitions, and this number is increasing overall here. So we're not even talking about the mean here. So we literally talk about the overall frequencies that we observe here. So you might still have biases of more popular artists here. Nevertheless, you can see that, okay, this number of exhibitions is increasing over time. And at this point, when someone dies, these exhibitions stay on the same level, or if something might rather decrease. So this is interesting. On the other hand, you can see that the auctions, so the number of auctions here is starting to kick off like around 10, 15 years before someone dies, and is even becoming bigger and bigger after someone dies. So it's not super surprisingly what we observe here, but nevertheless, it's impressive to see, I think in a descriptive figure. And these are the main results that we estimated for this research. And on the left-hand side, you can see the number of exhibitions that artists have with all bunch of different fixed effects that we included here. We control for time effects and countries where the exhibition took place, and so on and so forth. So in the 10 years before someone dies, you can see a relatively stable and a stable amount of exhibitions that the artists have, as well as 10 years after someone dies. So you can see there's not much variation in this kind of overall effect of the exhibitions. However, if you have only a look at the immediate years after someone dies, you can see this negative correlation that is somewhat surprisingly, I would say. And that is pretty causally. So a pretty sharp but short-lived drop in exhibitions after someone dies. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, you can see the logarithm is as a dependent variable, the logarithmic prices, so the auction prices of the artworks of the same artist, if we observe auctions with years before the death, that is relatively stable, and if something rather increasing, definitely, so the prices, and after someone dies, we almost everywhere on average observe positive price premiums. So after someone dies, you have the scarcity argument that might kicks in, and you would say prices increase on average. So these are results for the exhibition and for the auction market. And now I would like to jump to this interplay that I was talking about. So here on the x-axis, you can see the age at death. So left means someone dies relatively early with 20, and on the right you can see someone dies with the age 100. The y red axis at 0, that means above everything means positive auction prices. Below that means negative auction prices after someone dies. Then as a next step, we split the sample in low and high reputation artists. That is as well explained in the paper a bit more in detail how we did that. So, but essentially you have low and high reputation artists at the time of death. And now we can try to understand the market signals that we would say is coming from the exhibition market that somehow is having an impact on the auction prices.
Yes,
so,
Matthias, this is just
yes,
to ask you to finish in about 2-3 minutes. Just
yes, okay. So it's almost one of the last.
You're great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So overall, what you can see, not very surprisingly, is that high reputation artists at the time of death, overall, they have, after they die, positive auction prices. This is not really surprising. So the market understood, okay, this must be a very reputable artist, and we also want to collect this artist after he or she passes away, so prices must be higher. On the other hand, with the low reputation artists, you can see that the somehow strongest signal that we observe, the strongest negative signal to the auction pricing prices, is when someone dies relatively old. So this signal is not very informative to the market, and the death of the artist was expected, and he or she never really reached a high level of reputation during their life and career life cycle, and you will see the strongest negative impact post-mortem with those prices. On the other hand, somewhat surprisingly, I'd say that will lead us already to the conclusion, is that I think that interesting was that you will observe post-mortem positive price premiums, the strongest or the highest positive prices for artists who have a relatively low reputation and pass away very early. So I would say this is part of a twofold argument. So firstly, you will have the signal to the market that someone passes away very, very early. So you have expected future profits, because you would say, okay, these artists were not at their peak of career, so we might invest as an idea of we will get future higher profits, because as a speculation option maybe, and as well you would say maybe that, okay, since they didn't have a very high reputation and died early in this combination, their prices of artworks were relatively low compared to the high reputation artists already. So you can buy cheap artworks and as a speculation object for future profits. And then as well, what we frame here in this paper again is this legal transaction cost idea that we developed here, that we definitely would associate with this negative but short-lived drop in exhibitions, that we would say is very interesting and is something that has been a bit neglected in the at least economic analysis of exhibition and auctions might as well, is the understanding of transaction costs here in this context. So thanks so much for listening, and I'm happy to answer some questions.
Thank you a lot, Matthias, for a great presentation. Actually, virtual clap. Before we proceed with next presentation, is there any question? There is none in the chat. I will just open with one small question. You did not focus on the methodological details, but nevertheless, out of curiosity, why did you use two causal approaches? So you use the event study with staggered adoption and the regression discontinuity design. Is this merely for sensitivity purposes, for verification, or is there any other special reason?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's it was rather a robustness check, so the regression discontinuity design, to better understand if what we observe has been driven by other important factors, or if we are able to replicate our results with different methods. So this was the main reason.
Okay, thanks. Okay, then I suggest we put the discussion for the end. There will be some additional interesting questions for sure. And I give the floor now to David, to Professor David Drosby. I would say no need of introduction. David is presently a distinguished professor at Macquarie University in Sydney, and with many foundational works in culture economics. David, I would ask you, to share the screen.
Oh, there we are. I think that's shared now. Hang on. Share screen. Is that visible to everybody?
No, we still see only the gallery picture.
Okay, just a sec. Share. All right.
It should be just a green.
Yeah, here we go again.
Button at the bottom.
But I've got to find the PowerPoint now.
Thank you to David for being here. Also, due to time differences, it's
hang on.
7 p.m.
in
Sydney.
I've got to just find the PowerPoint. Yeah.
It's probably just to click on the green button.
Yeah.
The bottom share screen, and then.
Okay. Yeah. There we go.
Ah, fantastic.
Okay.
We're here.
There. Sorry about that. It's a while to get it up, but I think that's all right now. And I'll
David, just to put it full screen, but this is like we did at the start. Just to put it full screen.
Yeah. No.
But also if.
No, that's not it.
No, the right. the fully right of those of the four.
Oh, yeah.
What about them?
Sorry.
Yeah, here and the.
There it is. I can't just
We can go. Okay, we can go in this way.
I think we might have to go with this one. Yeah. But sorry about that, because it's not working all that well on my computer, or at least maybe I'm not working all that well. Anyway, it's sorry. It looks like I've got a mask on because the sun's going down behind my window, and so it's a little bit hard to. I might turn my vision off, I think, because it's not very good at the moment. So let me do that. I'll stop the video. Okay. Look, let me start now, and I'm sorry to be a bit late getting going. All right. Look, this paper is called "Preference Formation in Demand for the Live Theatre," and the motivation for the research really comes from out of the original project, which we started back in 2020. It was a 3-year project which was funded by the Australian Research Council to look at values in the live theatre. And we were going to do it from the supply side, but unfortunately, we were working with a theatre company here in Sydney, but a month or so after we started the project, COVID happened and all the theatre companies' theatres closed. And so we had to shift our attention to the demand side, which is in fact what then led to, amongst several other parts of our project, led to this paper, which was published in the Journal of Cultural Economics a couple of years ago. Anyway, so the motivations were, first of all, and the most important from the point of view of economics, is that we always take preferences in demand studies to be given, and we know that they're dependent on tastes and so on. But people often say, "Oh, tastes are something which is subjective, and we can't measure them. So let's just take the preferences as given, and we'll move on from there to look at demand for whatever it is." And there's a long sort of backstory to the question of preferences, and that was what was of interest to us in this project. How do preferences get formed in the demand for a particular cultural product, in this case for attendance at the live theatre? So that was the first motivation, to try and see if something could be said about the ways in which preferences are formed. The second thing was particularly to do with the notion of live theatre. As we know, COVID has led to a shift that was already underway in cultural consumption towards digital or streamed, particularly in the performing arts, towards digital or streamed performance, but it was also happening in the visual arts as well, towards consuming things digitally rather than in the presence of, in the case of a gallery, the real works of art in the gallery, or in the case of performance, in the presence of the real performers. And that was particularly true in the area of music, obviously, the movement towards digital consumption. And yet we're aware of the fact that there remains a demand for liveness, which is, as it were, unable to be substituted by a streamed performance, because the experience of being in a theatre in the company of the actors or the musicians who are performing the works at that very moment, and you're consuming them in the moment of their creation, is something for which a digital or a stream performance doesn't substitute. And so there remains a demand for live theatre, and we see this happening, and a demand for live music as well, and right across the performing arts, which is of interest. And why does this keep going, and what is it about the liveness which is important to people? And part of this project, which I'm not going to talk about in this presentation, but part of the project was we did a comparison between demand for a live performance and a digital performance, and we found that people were much prepared to pay a lot more for a live performance than for a digital one of the same thing. The third motivation was about the academic disciplines that were involved in this project. It's an interdisciplinary project, and it was particularly aimed to bring together the disciplines of cultural economics and theatre studies. There's a big academic discipline of theatre studies, which we in economics never hear about. And by the same token, the people in theatre studies never hear about cultural economics. And so there was an intention to try and bring these things together. And so my two colleagues on this project, John Seven is a theatre studies academic, and Katya Petetskia is an artist as well as being an economist. She's also an artist, and so there were these other disciplines were being brought to bear. And I did a seminar in London last year in which we gathered together theatre studies people and cultural economists and had a very interesting discussion about the ways in which each of the disciplines can learn from the other. And then finally, we were interested in obtaining some empirical results. So what we proposed was a two-stage model. First of all, the way in which preferences are formed. In other words, there's a first stage which is related to the formation of preferences, and the second stage is how the preferences then deployed in determining demand for future experiences. And we call that conditional demand because it's not actual demand yet. It's only a conditional demand for the types of experiences that people might want in the future. That was the sort of general theoretical framework that we used in this project. And the tasks that we set ourselves were to identify the nature of the experiences and the preferences that people would form. So the first sort of theoretical exercise that we went through was to break down the notion of experience into some component parts. It's a bit like saying, why do you go to the theatre? Why do people go to the theatre? To have an experience of some sort. What sort of experience? So to be entertained. Well, that may be the case, but that doesn't tell us very much. And so what we wanted to look at was, can we be more specific about the nature of the experiences that people seek and the people actually enjoy when they go to the theatre? And so we came up, first of all, with the first three on that list. And they're in a way, they're fairly obvious, I suppose. You go to the theatre to be stimulated, to have ideas, to be challenged in some ideas, and you could call that a sort of intellectual engagement, which is certainly something which is attractive about going to the theatre and the reason why people go. It can also be another type of experience. It can be an emotional experience because you can be moved to joy and to sadness and compassion and all sorts of emotional experiences which can come from watching a play or watching listening to music or whatever. So emotional was the second sort of dimension, if you like, of the experience that we were talking about. The third one was social. People go to theatre because it's a social occasion. People can enjoy there's several things, I suppose, but there's the social experience of being in a theatre with a whole lot of other people experiencing a performance at the same time. Actors will always say they would much rather perform to a full theatre, and most people who go to the theatre would prefer to be there with other people rather than sitting alone in a theatre watching a play. So the social experience, not just during a performance, but also before and after a performance or during the interval when people talk to each other and so on. So there's a whole lot of social aspects to it which are important. Those three were the original three that we thought of, but we realized that there's also another one which brings all of those three together in a sort of way, and that is the fact that sometimes people talk about the experience of art generally, and of theatre particularly, as being transcendental or euphoric or taking you out of yourself so much that you sort of lose track of time, and those sorts of things which couldn't derive from any of those experiences. And so we categorize another one, which is probably best described as euphoric, as transcendental. So the task then was to empirically test, to propose the model. I won't give you the details of the actual model, but it's very simple, as I said at the beginning. The task was then to test these ideas empirically. We did this using data from a survey that we did.
David,
Yeah.
may I just shortly interrupt? There is a question from Trine
Sure.
Bille, I think, in the chat. She asks, where do those 4 categories come from? Is there some research theories or
Sure.
format?
Yeah,
Thanks.
they came from small group testing that we did, which we asked a very open-ended question to begin with, which was, why do you go to theatre? Why? And then there was a whole series of responses ranging over all sorts of things. But what we were able to do with those responses was to categorize them back into specific types of response, and the 3 essentially, well, actually, I suppose all 4 of those responses were ones which we then finally adopted. So that was the sort of those. It was small group work which we did here in Sydney. The survey that we did was online, of course, because again, this was done mostly during COVID. And so we finished up with a sample size of about 900 roughly, and we did the survey in 2021. So the questions of measurement. The first issue about measurement was, how do we measure preferences? Because we wanted to find out if we wanted to have an experience, a measurement of preferences so that we could see what was determining them. And so that was done by asking respondents to rank preferences for 5 types of experience, being the most to the least preferred. Those were the 4 that we had, and then we had being entertained, which was in the empirical work was suppressed. So we used a 5-point numerical scale. It was a sort of like a scale, so it's fairly familiar to most people when you're measuring these things. And there was quite a lot of detail was collected from the respondents in relation to each of these, carefully sort of structured so that we came up with questions about how would you prefer, or how would you rank preferences, your preference for being stimulated to think, being engaged emotionally, and so on. But it was all constructed in such a way that we could get empirical measures of these variables. The next one was in relation to experiences, and so we asked people in terms of the frequency with which they had experienced these certain types of experience. How many times have you experienced intellectual stimulation? It wasn't as crude as this by any means. I mean, this was really, it's very hard to, in a quick presentation, to be able to give all the details as to how these were done, but let me assure you that it was done. And so that was coded according to always, most of the time, sometimes never, that sort of scale. Again, a 5-point scale, again, a sort of like a arrangement. The weighting problem for aggregation of a series of experiences within each of these categories, we resolved by using a principal components analysis for these things, and so we were able to get a better than just a simple aggregation of the separate components. Then I think the sun's gone down now, so I might be able to resume my screen just a sec. Not that I'm all that good to look at, but there we are. That's better. It was a little confusing before. Okay, that's that. Then the next one was theatre capital. Where's that gone? Now my button's not working. There we are. And again, this is something I didn't mention this variable before, but when we're talking about the formation of preferences, we essentially proposed 2 things. Firstly was the experiences that I've just been talking about, but the second was what we call theatre capital, which is essentially human capital, which is derived from the sorts of experiences that people have had growing up or as adults in terms of engagement with the theatre. For example, studying drama or theatre at some stage, or right at the beginning, growing up in a theatre-going household. This is rather similar to the Bourdieu idea about people's human capital being expanded through experiences as a child or growing up. And then also people who were actively participating in theatre making at some stage, some time or another. So these were all the sorts of things which we put into the variables for theatre capital. And then finally, we have the question of conditional demand. So we were asking people what sorts of future experiences that are offered by theatres would attract them to continue to attend live performances. This is something which was particularly interesting to theatre managements. I mean, how do we keep people coming? And this is particularly in a time when there's this awareness that people are being increasingly funneled away into streamed consumption. How do we get people to keep coming to the theatre? And so we put propositions to the respondents about the types of things that might be on offer in a theatre in the future, and then we measured the extent to which they might be attracted by these things, and then we looked at the ways in which these things were determined using the data that we had. So the estimation we did in two different ways. We did independent estimates of stages 1 and 2 using ordered probit, and the other way, which was more sort of complete, I suppose, was simultaneous estimation using two-stage least squares. And the results, let me just jump to the table, which shows the independent estimation of preference formation. And there you can see that in 3 of the 4 types of experience, that is emotional, intellectual, and transcendental, there's a fairly strong causal effect between the experiences and the preferences, and also that theatre capital also has a significant effect in relation to, particularly in relation to emotional preferences for emotional experiences or preferences for the euphoric sort of experiences. So we found essentially that past experience does exert a significant influence on preference formation, which I suppose isn't all that surprising. At least that's what we expected to find. And the human capital characteristics are important, especially in establishing the theatre studies concept of a theatre goer. The theatre studies academics are quite interested in this notion of what makes up somebody to be a sort of habitual theatre goer, and the results of this study do seem to support the proposition that the human capital characteristics do have an influence on this. So that's the first stage of the estimation, and the second stage was relating to conditional demand, and there's the table for that, which is a little bit harder to see, but I can just sort of summarize the results by saying that the theatre goers are certainly discriminating in their potential choices of future attendances, and so our results do seem to suggest that there are, particularly in relation to emotional and intellectual experiences, that these are quite likely in reasonably sophisticated theatre goers to be the sorts of things that will attract them back, and that's something which would be important for theatre managers to understand. And so those are the sorts of things that come out of this. There's a lot of detail there, which I haven't got time to go into. Some of this is discussed in more detail in the paper, which was published in the Journal of Cultural Economics, and some of it can be seen from these slides. But I would just say in conclusion that, well, we're currently working on a choice modelling study of repertoire choice by theatres, because this sort of the sort of insights that come from this preference formation conditional demand study, these results do suggest something about how theatres might program plays or works of various sorts to attract various sorts of audiences. And we're going to do a choice modelling study which will look at a broader spectrum of consumers than the ones that we use in this empirical work, to see to what extent it's possible to identify. I mean, the basic question is, that's being looked at here is do you program really popular works which are going to get a lot of people to come and pay a lot of money, or which are not particularly intellectually challenging, or on the other hand, ones which are more artistically satisfying, but which don't bring in the audiences quite so much. And this is a very characteristic dilemma that theatre companies face. Okay, so just to conclude, the model does provide some plausible results, I think, to add to existing work on this on this topic, and it's a supplement to the more usual type of demand analysis. The demand analysis which we're familiar with in economics and in cultural economics is the ways in which prices and incomes and other determinants will affect demand for cultural goods. This project was looking beneath the surface of the taste and not taking them just simply as given. And also, I think I could conclude that the interdisciplinary collaboration that was the motivation for this, or one of the motivations for this work, was really quite important in demonstrating how cultural economics can actually derive insights from other social sciences. Some of the ways in which we formulated our hypotheses were very much dependent on the methodologies of theatre studies analysis, which is quite unusual for economists to be involved in these sorts of things. And so it was a sort of, to a limited extent, I suppose, but nevertheless, it was an illustration of the fact that interdisciplinary collaboration, which we don't always do in economics or in cultural economics, interdisciplinary collaborations can be very helpful. Okay, that's all. Thank you, Andre, and thank you for.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry about the mix up with my slides at the beginning. I'll get this right one of these days. Okay.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. We a little bit exaggerated the time, but no problem. And also due to these time issues, we will get hopefully debate also at the end. I suggest we just proceed now also with the third presentation and then with the debate. So we have a third presenter is Andrea, Dr. Andrea Baldin, who is presently a researcher at the Ca' Foscari University, Venice. It's a joint paper with Trine Pile. Please, Andrea.
Okay, just a moment. No.
Maybe just to stick on the time, but yeah, we're still, hopefully.
Am I sharing my screen?
Yes, it's not full. It's not full screen. We see. Yeah, now it is okay.
Yeah, now, okay.
Thanks.
So, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you are. The paper I'm going to present has been published in International Review of Economics a few months ago, and it is one of the output of a bigger project funded by Agustinus Foundation and called The Value of Culture in the Society. So you know that the assessment of no market valuation is one important topic in cultural economics, and these no market values are mainly estimated through preference methods. And these methods have both advantages as well as weakness. So in the case of state preference methods, such as quantity evaluation method, the main advantage is that they assess also the new non-use value because it is a survey-based methodology. But on the other side, the main weakness is that the willingness to pay provided by respondents could be subject to different sources of bias due to the hypothetical scenario that the respondent face, so that they can provide also strategic or unreliable answers. On the other side, the level preference methods are not subject to this bias because the estimation is based on real economic choices. But the main weakness is that these methods don't assess the use value, the non-use values, but only user values. and they require some strong assumptions. So for instance, in the case of the hedonic price method, one assumption is a perfectly competitive market. So in this framework, in this paper, we try to employ a new emerging methodology for assessing the no market values that is employed in environmental economics. There are few applications in cultural economics, and this method is the life satisfaction or subjective well-being approach. This method relies on an increasing body of research that shows how a self-assessment of life satisfaction is a reliable, valid, and stable proxy of the individual utility. So basically, it is asked to a representative sample of the population to self-assess their life satisfaction from 0 to 10. So the wording of the question we have used is how satisfied are you with your life overall, from 0, very dissatisfied, to 10, very satisfied. Concerning the wording of the questions, there are some guidelines provided by the OECD, such that the life satisfaction score provided by the respondent is broad, inclusive of all the aspects of life, and also with reference to the present. That are the main conditions that make this life satisfaction score as a proxy of the individual utility. So this score, with this score, we estimate a life satisfaction equation in which we include as independent variables many determinants of the life satisfaction, such as age, gender, marital status, working status, health status, and so on. And among the main determinants, there are two of our interests, which is the income, that is typically specified in a logarithmic form to account for a decreasing marginal effect of income on life satisfaction, and also the non-market good under analysis, that in this case will be cultural participation, specifically museums visits and theaters attendance. So we estimate this life satisfaction equation, and using the coefficients associated with income and the non-market good, we calculate the compensation surplus. That is our measure of the non-market values of cultural participation. The consumer surplus can be interpreted as the amount of income I'm willing to give up to obtain an increase of 1 unit of the non-market good, keeping the life satisfaction constant. So this approach has main advantage that it is not subject to an hypothetical situations, and it doesn't ask for a direct evaluation of the non-market good. So there are no reasons for respondents to provide some strategic answers. On the other side, as a main weakness is that there are some endogeneity issues in the life satisfaction equation that concerns both the income and, in this case, cultural participation variables. So in the case of cultural participation, it is endogenous because if on one side the cultural participation has an impact on the life satisfaction, and in this sense there is a wide evidence in literature. On the other side, maybe people that are predisposed towards socializations and so are happier, they tend to participate more to cultural events. So they are happier regardless the cultural participation. So in this sense, there can be a simultaneity issues. So also the life satisfaction can have an impact on the cultural participation. As an instrumental variable, we use the score from 1 to 5 assigned to two sentences concerning the importance of theaters and museums for Denmark. So we use the score about the opinions of the existence of theater and museums as an instrumental variable, and they are supposed to be exogenous, so with respect to life satisfaction, and relevant because they are correlated with the cultural participation. And in this sense, there is a paper by Trine in 2002 that shows how the user status is correlated with non-use values in a sense of importance of cultural organizations for the country cultural level. And moreover, the use of opinion and belief about the no-market good has been used as an instrument also in other studies that adopt this approach, mainly with reference to sport participation. The second variable subject to this simultaneity issue is the income. Income is endogenous because happier people are likely to be more productive and so to increase their income. So if richer people are happier, probably also happier people are richer. And in addition, some variables, some independent variables used in the life satisfaction equation, such as living area, house property, health status, are endogenous, determined by income. So income can affect this variable, living area, house property, and so on, that in turn affect life satisfaction. So it is not possible to assess the full impact of income on life satisfaction. And this leads to a downward, an upward bias of the consumer surplus because the coefficient of income is in the denominator. And so we need to find an instrument also for income. And this has been mainly the most challenging issues that we face in writing this paper. We had a look at the literature to find some good instrument for income. We have Fujihara that proposed the lottery wins as an exogenous shock to income, but we don't have this variable available. Other authors use spouse income, social class, and father's years of education, but they are, this seems to be weak instruments. The most used instrumental variables for income is a measure of a predict household income. So what some authors did was to regress the logarithm of income on a set of industry and occupation dummy variables with around 5,000 of combination between industry and occupation dummies and other determinants of income. And then the exponential of the fitted value are used as instrument. And this instrument require a large data set, such as National Service of Household. Our data set is not so large because we have around 4,000 of observations. So we have used a similar instrument, still a measure of the predict household income. So we have used data from Eurostat to derive the average income in Denmark for each combination of gender, the industry code at 1-digit level, and the occupation code at 1-digit level. And we use this value as our instrumental variable. So mainly the idea behind the use of a predict household income as an instrumental variable is that this income reflects industry and occupation factors, but not exceptional efforts by a member of the household that is driven by the life satisfaction. So somehow we filter out the effect of the life satisfaction on income. Clearly, there are some weakness in using this instrument because also the choice of the industry and occupation is endogenous to individual preference. Because the choice of an occupation or an industry can be driven by the fact that some work environment is more pleasant than others, even if they offer a lower wage compared to other industry or occupations. But anyway, we have used this instrument and we estimate the life satisfaction equation. So we use as data set a quantity evaluation survey about the theater and museum landscape in Denmark. This survey has been distributed in May and June 2020, so at the beginning of the COVID outbreak, to a random sample of around 4,400 Danes taxpayers. Almost 2,000 completed the survey. This is a content evaluation survey, so we have also questions about cultural participation frequency, and we include also 2 life satisfaction questions. One concerning the current life satisfaction, so during the pandemic, we asked to the participants. We include also different questions on other life aspects that can affect the subjective well-being, so sport activities, volunteer socialization, health state, and so on. And this data set has been merged with registered data from Statistics Denmark that include the different social, demographic, and economic information, as well as this information for the other members of the family of the respondents. We merge these 2 data sets and we estimate the life satisfaction considering the score before the pandemic. So we estimate both OLS and the 2-stage least square. So you can see that when we use the 2-stage least square, the coefficient associated to income increases quite a lot, leading to a reduction of the consumer surplus. Concerning cultural participation, we have used, in one case, a dummy variable. So have you visited a museum or attended a theater performance at least once in the last 12 months, and also a continuous variable. And we see a statistical significant effect for theaters, but not for museum. And in the case of theater, we calculate the consumer surplus. And as you can see, it is quite high value. So for the model with the dummy around 14,000 euros, and for the continuous variable around 5,000 euros. Then we use both scores of the life satisfaction questions, so before the pandemic and during the pandemic, to estimate the loss of life satisfaction in monetary terms, specifically due to the closure of theater and museums. So in this case, we applied the difference approach, in which the a treated group is composed by theaters and museum users. So the ones who have attended a theater performance or visit a museum at least once in the last 12 months. And in this case, the treatment is preventing them to attend a theater performance or visit a museum. And clearly the assumption is that this treatment has no effect on the control group, so on non-users, because they are indifferent on whether the theater and museums are open or not. So we estimate this difference in difference model. As the survey has been submitted only once, so we don't have the value, for instance, of income before and during the pandemic. We use as time-varying variables the answers of respondents about whether their life with respect to different life dimension has improved, unchanged, or deteriorated. So as life dimension, we consider job situation, job security, financial situation, income security, physical health, mental state, and stress level. These are all dummies that are set to 0 in T1, so before the pandemic. Another variables we use is the variable social that refer to the question, before Corona crisis, how often did you see your friends, family for socializing in leisure time? Values from 1 to 6. And we assume that in T2, so during the pandemic, the value of this variable is equal to 1 because during the lockdown, it was not possible to meet friends or family members outside the household. So here we have the results of the definitive model. We consider 3 different models. So in model 1 and 2, the treatment variable is a dummy variable, so theater and museum user. In the model 3 and 4, the treated group is composed by people who says that they miss very much the possibility to visit a museum or going to the theater. We assume that these are fervent cultural consumers, so the one that suffered the most the closure of theater museums during the lockdown. And finally, model 5 and 6, we consider a continuous treatment based on the frequency of participation to theater and museum. We need an income coefficient, so we integrate the first life satisfaction equation with this definitive model in a sibling unrelated regression framework. So as in this case, we have a welfare loss because we have a decrease of the cultural participation due to the lockdown. The formula for calculating the welfare loss is slightly different. So in this case, the consumer surplus is interpreted as the additional income that keeps the life satisfaction constant when there is a decrease in the supply of the non-market good. Yes, in the definitive model, we see that there is a statistically significant effect only for people who says that they miss very much the opportunity to go to the theater or to the museum during the lockdown. And also for museum users, but only when we consider a continuous treatment. For these cases, we calculate the welfare loss. And again, you see that we have a very high estimate of these non-market values. And this is a common issue in most application of the life satisfaction approach that we have seen also in environmental economics. This is the main issue, and we think that future research should address this issue of endogeneity of the income variable, finding a more appropriate instrument. And then there is also the issue whether the life satisfaction approach and the preference methods actually assess the same thing. On one side, we have preference methods that are more used in cultural economics that are based on individual preference and measure the no market values in terms of willingness to pay. On the other side, we have a life satisfaction approach that is based on the individual utility and estimate in monetary terms the change of utility due to a change in the supply of the no-market good. And this is also an open question for future research. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you a lot, Andrea, for another excellent presentation today. Are there any questions? Maybe before we open the debate, just one minor comment. I mean, from a statistical viewpoint, confidence intervals that you had for the consumer surplus were all including zero. Is there some issue with this? But just it was all from minus to plus.
Yes, it includes zero because in some cases the variable is significant only at 10%. Yes, in the other case, from the calculation, yes, even if they are strongly significant, we have to consider about the significance of two variables, the income and the no-market value goods variable. And the combination of these two significance can lead to include zero in the 95% confidence interval. So, yes. So it is not a very precise estimate of the market values. And this is a common weakness with this approach. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, I'm taking your job. You should be worried about.
It's taking our jobs.
I'm Dr.
Okay. Are there any comments?
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention you that the estimation of the consumer surplus is obtained with the delta method because, yeah, let's clarify this.
Okay, thanks. Maybe I start the discussion with I will try a few questions for each of the presenters, and hopefully please just put your questions in the chat. I hope I didn't miss any. Trinepile, I think, was asking you, David, for references about the concepts you used. Maybe for Matthias, thanks. So I went actually checking also the original paper of you and Alexandra, who left in the middle of the symposium. So mainly one side I would ask, so you have several approaches. You have regression discontinuity, as we discussed. You have event study. You have even hedonic pricing. How did you combine causal perspective, if you did? I did not understand this adequately, with causal issues, because usually at least hedonic regression is not causal by itself, but maybe a question. Also, I think from the original paper, you have a high dimensional specification, and how did you deal with these high dimensional issues in the model? Maybe also just in terms of curiosity, you're using regression discontinuity design. Have you considered both crisp and fuzzy? There are many approaches here, and you use, I think, polynomial specification. Are there parametric, non-parametric general issues here? For David, shortly, thanks for the presentation. So I was wondering, basically, you are using latent constructs. That's why you use also principal component analysis, I think, to derive the scores. Could this also be modeled in any other manner? You are basically using each preference individually, and also how does this relate to general considerations that also Andrea was mentioning about preferences and utility? We know that naturally demand systems are usually estimated by 2SLS, and based on these latent constructs, could this be also estimated in maybe some other manner? For Andrea, we already shortly mentioned. What I was wondering is also again, you used say difference approaches, say with continuous treatment. This is probably related to the recent literature that is emerging here. But could the instrumental variable strategy here also be replaced with any other to receive maybe even some stronger significant results? And maybe how also how to interpret, like we discussed, these weakly significant main results. Are there consequences of the used approach, or and could this be, like you mentioned, be improved, say, by another instrument, possibly for the income, or are there consequences of the reality itself, just that this interval, this coefficient that you estimate is basically just weakly identified? Thanks. Hopefully just to stimulate also others. Maybe we go in the order, maybe Matthias first.
Thanks, Andrei, for the question. So all of them are very good questions, and I'd say, so first of all, it's ongoing research, so we are still in the progress of revising the paper and to strengthen along the lines that we are able, based on the data we have. So I'd say what you were referring to with the regression discontinuity sign, so this is fair enough. So you can definitely play around with best models that are fitting the treatment that you would try to identify, and we were playing around with polynomial orders and fuzzy or not. So all of that would exist, but in the end, I think the results are pretty stable and are leading towards one direction. So it was just a decision we've made to put these kind of figures and regressions in the current version that we observe. And then regarding the causal identification of the death as the treatment, so that's very good. Like it's a good point. So I think it's obviously it's hard to have something like a never treated unit, so people will never die. So this is certainly a path that you cannot follow. You can try to what we do is with the not yet treated approach, with certain weaknesses that we have in this event study designs. And on the other hand, I would say one possibility is as well to follow a bit more in details the exogeneity of the death with the unexpected death. So this is probably a way to isolate the true causal death effect. On the other hand, then the following observations that you have with someone who died unexpectedly and very early, I think that it's already part of what we try to explain. So if you die early with a low reputation or high reputation, then differences afterwards can be explained with this causal path again. So I'd say if you have an idea, so like please feel free to send me an email. So I would be very much interested if you would say we can isolate it a bit more. But At the moment, I think that's what we have.
Could this heterogeneity that is also essential for what you do and longitudinal effects also be modeled in a different manner? Currently, you model heterogeneity with interactions, right?
Mm-hmm. Do you have an idea? So, yeah, a good point. So I read it down. So we haven't really thought of another way than interactions, maybe.
Usually, heterogeneity is also modeled with Bayesian and also using
With
some
what?
prior
Excuse me?
with Bayesian approaches, using some prior like Mark or any other with Bayesian.
Mm-hmm.
But this is just general or other approaches. But also this longitude. But to continue, maybe David, for the responses.
Yeah, look, thank you for the question, Andre. As I understood it, you were asking about the way we use principal components analysis in the specification of the variables. I'd sort of respond to that by saying that one of the issues that we face often in cultural economics, I suppose in other areas of economics as well, particularly in environmental economics, I guess, is the question of dealing with qualitative variables. And there's questions of aggregation of scales, which are essentially derived from qualitative estimations of qualitative responses by survey participants. And we have to put them somehow or other into a reasonable sort of measure, and the usual way might be to use those responses independently. You can do that, of course, and then that expands the number of independent variables rather a lot. Or you can combine them in a way which gives you a weighted, some sort of unweighted or weighted average. Now, if you're going to do an unweighted average or an unweighted measure, that's one way to do it, and fair enough. If you don't have any particular prior for estimating why one particular aspect is more important than another, fair enough. But we found, in fact, that by using, we did a factor analysis, and of course, and as we know, that gives essentially a de facto weighting amongst the variables, so that you get an aggregated score, what's called a factor score, that comes out of that sort of factor analysis, which can be used in the regression as we did, and it gives you a better sort of estimate, I think, of the variable itself. We tried this actually comparing the factor score, by using the factor score as an explanatory variable with just using an unweighted aggregation of the like-it responses. And we found that the factor scores did do a rather more plausible job, as you'd expect, because it's giving more emphasis to the more important components of the variable. So I think that's really what I'd say. I think there's a sort of lesson in there, because we use this sort of data quite a lot in cultural economics, and particularly in the sort of survey work that we're talking about. Andrea's paper, I think, referred to some of that issue of how to deal with scores like that are derived from the same sort of thing to do with life satisfaction or something like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrea, maybe?
Yes. First, I want to answer to a question I see on the chat by Luis. And yeah, well, in the life satisfaction equation, we haven't distinguished between rural and urban areas, but we use as different regional dummies. So at the end, we don't know if there are some different results between the rural and the urban areas. So coming back to your question, Andrei, yeah, in the first version of the paper, we didn't use instrumental variable for income, and that's the reason why the paper has been rejected. Yeah, we are ambitious, so we try hike journal, but it's been rejected specifically for this issue of endogeneity of income, and it has been really challenging to find any instruments for that. And clearly, the most used one is the predict household income. We have seen this also in important journal like Journal of Public Economics, Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization. So we try to use this as an inspiration. Of course, it wasn't possible with only 4,000 observations to build a measurement as the other authors did. So of course, this was a problem in our paper, and the estimates are not so much reliable. So we think that we have to pay more attention on whether there is an impact on satisfaction more than take the values of the of the consumer surplus. And concerning the significance, one interesting thing is that theaters seems to impact life satisfaction and museums don't. And we have tried to provide a convincing explanation for that. Maybe one reason is that going to the theater is more expensive than visiting museums. So it's a more deliberate decision by the individuals, while museums is more integrated in the daily life. And maybe it is not perceived as something that had utility, even if in the difference approach we found opposite. We found that museums is the lack of museums affect the decrease of life satisfaction, while theater doesn't. And maybe this is a matter of substitution goods, in the sense that theater performance were replaced by, I don't know, digital consumption that were more available than museum digital consumption. But yeah, we just speculate on that.
Were the results of difference more reliable than the 2SLS? But I think you also combined them, right, with the
I don't know, because difference is based on the true life satisfaction score. The two stages are based only on one before the pandemic. Also in the difference, the way we build the treatment and the control group can pose some problem, because there are some factors we didn't take into account. For instance, maybe the cultural consumers tend to travel more than non-cultural consumers, and we didn't take into account this factor because it was not asked in the survey. So yeah, it was quite challenging. So I don't know.
Okay, thank you. I will provide a space. We have econometricians here in the audience. We have many spectators, many of you. Please ask your questions. Feel free to do it. If not, I thank again to all the three excellent speakers. Thank you for the presentations. As mentioned, the webinar will be accessible online, and hopefully as those debates on the methodologies are gaining ground also due to the artificial intelligence era and so on, they will stimulate additional thoughts both to the audience and the speakers for additional studies. So thank you again. We're looking forward to next COES. Elizabeth already replied in the chat about it. Thank you, and looking forward to seeing you soon, if not before, at Emace in Segovia. Thanks. Enjoy. Thanks a lot to all. Thank you, David, for taking the time. Sydney. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks so much for organizing.
Thanks.
So,
thank you.
see you soon. Thank you.